Hey guys, tonight we're taking a journey, not to the grand forums or the bustling baths of ancient Rome, but into a much darker, often horrifying aspect of their society, what punishments were like for you in ancient Rome. You might imagine a stern judge in a simple prison cell, but trust me, the reality was often brutal, public, and designed to inflict profound suffering. A quick reality check. You with your modern sensibilities and aversion to public humiliation probably wouldn't last a single hour. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're feeling up to it, drop your location and local time in the comments. I'd love to see where everyone's tuning in from. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You might think that being punished in ancient Rome meant a discreet, internal affair, perhaps a quiet lecture or a fine. But for many offenses, especially those committed by common citizens, slaves, or soldiers, the primary form of retribution was a terrifying public spectacle designed to inflict agonizing pain and profound shame, the public humiliation of flogging. Imagine yourself as the accused, perhaps a petty thief caught in the marketplace, a soldier who deserted his post, or a citizen who insulted a public official. You're dragged, perhaps through jeering crowds, to a prominent location, the forum, a public street, or the military camp. Your heart pounds, a mixture of fear and dread because you know what's coming. You are stripped bare, at least from the waist up, exposing your skin. Your hands might be tied to a post, or you might be held down by guards, ensuring you cannot resist. The instrument of punishment is then revealed a whip, the flagrum or scudica, often made of multiple leather thongs, sometimes tipped with pieces of bone, metal, or lead. This isn't just a simple stick, it's a tool designed to tear flesh. A common historical fact is that Roman whips were often far more brutal than simple switches, intended to lacerate the skin and inflict maximum pain. Then, the first blow descends. Imagine the searing pain as the lash connects with your bare skin, ripping through flesh, leaving a burning welt, then an open wound. You instinctively cry out, your body convulsing with agony. But the blows keep coming. A relentless, rhythmic assault. You hear the sharp crack of the whip, the gasp from the crowd, and your own ragged screams. Every strike adds to the burning agony, tearing more flesh, leaving streams of blood running down your back. The public nature of the flogging was crucial to its effectiveness. You are not suffering in private. You are suffering for all to see. Imagine the humiliation of your naked, bleeding body being exposed to the gaze of hundreds, perhaps thousands of onlookers. Some might jeer, some might avert their eyes, but all are witnesses to your profound shame and pain. This wasn't just about physical retribution, it was about destroying your dignity, publicly marking you as a transgressor, and instilling terror in anyone who might consider committing a similar offense. Your cries, your writhing, your shame, all become part of the spectacle, a living deterrent. The person inflicting the punishment might be a lictor, a Roman official's attendant, armed with fasces containing rods, a soldier, or a specially appointed executioner. They would be skilled in their grim task, ensuring that the punishment was administered with maximum pain, but usually just short of immediate death. To prolong the suffering and the public display, you might suffer dozens, even hundreds, of lashes, your body a canvas of raw, bleeding wounds. The aftermath was equally grim. You would be left bleeding, in intense pain, your body ravaged. Without modern medical care, these wounds would easily become infected in the dusty, unsanitary environment. Imagine a high fever setting in days later, the pus oozing from your torn flesh, the agony of every movement. Many who survived the flogging itself would succumb to infection or shock in the days and weeks that followed. You'd be left with permanent scars, a visible reminder of your transgression and the brutal reach of Roman justice. Historians still debate the specific types of offenses that consistently led to flogging versus other punishments. noting variations based on the offender's social status. However, for non-citizens and slaves, it was a common and brutal reality. So, as you hear the distant crack of an imaginary whip, remember that for you in ancient Rome, a simple mistake or a minor transgression could lead to agonizing public suffering, stripping you of your dignity and leaving you permanently scarred, both physically and psychologically. It certainly makes you profoundly grateful for modern legal systems that prioritize humane treatment and dignity, doesn't it? For the Romans, justice was often a bloody public display. So to 25 Jangcholen Tiep tu Chuangde. You've just endured the public, agonizing humiliation of flogging, a stark introduction to Roman punishment. But if your offense was more serious, or if you were merely awaiting trial, a different kind of nightmare awaited imprisonment. A pre-trial nightmare. Forget clean cells and humane treatment. Roman jails were dark, unsanitary, and brutal holding pens, designed not as punishment themselves, but to break your spirit before you even faced your accusers. Imagine yourself, now arrested for a more serious crime, perhaps theft from a wealthy citizen, assault, or simply being unable to pay your debts. You're dragged through the bustling streets of Rome, past curious onlookers, to the Mamertine prison, one of Rome's oldest and most feared jails, or a similar, lesser-known carcer prison. The air outside might be vibrant, but the moment you step through the heavy doors, you are plunged into oppressive gloom. Your heart pounds with a new kind of fear, a claustrophobic dread. The Roman concept of imprisonment was fundamentally different from ours. Prisons were rarely places of long-term punishment, as we understand them today. Instead, they were primarily holding facilities for individuals awaiting trial, judgment, or execution. This meant the conditions were designed not for reform, but for immediate control and deterrence. Imagine being thrown into a dark, damp, and incredibly cramped space. Your senses are immediately assaulted by the stench. A common historical fact is that Roman prisons, like the Tullianum part of the Mamertine, were often subterranean, built into natural caves or old cisterns, making them inherently damp and cold. The smell is overwhelming, a noxious blend of human waste, vomit, stale sweat, and damp earth. There's no sanitation beyond perhaps a single, overflowing bucket in the corner that rarely gets emptied. Imagine the flies, the rats, and the constant presence of your own and others' bodily fluids. You're forced to sit or lie on a cold, damp, dirt floor, sharing the space with other unfortunates, many of whom are ill or injured. This utter lack of hygiene was a breeding ground for disease, turning the prison into a literal death trap. You'd quickly develop skin infections, stomach ailments, and respiratory problems from the foul air and damp conditions. You might watch fellow prisoners succumb to fever or dysentery, their groans filling the oppressive silence. Light is a luxury rarely afforded. Imagine the perpetual gloom, the semi-darkness broken only by a sliver of light from a high grate, or a distant, flickering torch held by a guard. Your eyes struggle to adjust, making it impossible to discern details, fostering a sense of disorientation and profound despair. The darkness feels like it's pressing in on you, amplifying your fears and making every shadow seem menacing. Food and water are meager and unreliable. You'd receive only the bare minimum to keep you alive, often stale bread and contaminated water. Imagine the gnawing hunger, the constant thirst, and the physical weakness that sets in quickly. Your body, already stressed, would rapidly deteriorate from malnutrition and dehydration. You're not being nourished, you're simply being kept alive until your fate is decided. Historians still debate the extent to which Roman jails actively starved prisoners versus merely providing inadequate sustenance, but the outcome for the inmates was often similar. The overcrowding is palpable. You are crammed together with other prisoners, common criminals, debtors, political dissidents, and sometimes even slaves. There's no privacy, no personal space. You hear their moans, their desperate whispers, their occasional outbursts of anger or despair. This constant proximity to suffering without any respite would wear down your spirit, making you feel utterly trapped and hopeless. And the guards, they are often brutal and indifferent. Their job is to keep you confined, not to care for you. Any complaint, any perceived insolence, could be met with a casual beating or a harsh word. There's no one to appeal to, no one to intercede on your behalf. You are utterly powerless, awaiting a judgment that could be days, weeks, or months away. The purpose of these conditions was clear: to break your will. By the time you faced your trial, you would be physically weakened, mentally exhausted, and psychologically shattered, making you more compliant, more likely to confess, and less likely to resist your ultimate sentence. The prison itself was a form of pre-punishment, a grim ordeal that made any subsequent judgment almost a relief. So, as you hear the distant clang of an imaginary prison door, remember that for you in ancient Rome, even temporary imprisonment was a descent into a nightmare of filth, darkness, hunger, and disease. It was a brutal holding pen, designed to dehumanize and weaken, long before any formal sentence was passed. It certainly makes you appreciate clean water, proper ventilation, and the right to a speedy trial. Doesn't it for the Romans? Justice often began in a truly awful darkness. You've just endured the horrific conditions of a Roman prison, a nightmare designed to break your spirit even before trial. But if you were deemed a low-status criminal, a rebellious slave, or a prisoner of war, a far more brutal fate awaited: forced labor, a slow death sentence. Forget a few hours of community service. This was condemnation to a life of relentless, back-breaking toil in quarries, mines, or vast public works projects, ensuring a short, agonizing existence that slowly but surely consumed your body and soul. Imagine yourself now condemned, perhaps branded with a hot iron to mark your status, chained to a column of other unfortunates. You're being marched, often for days, away from the city, towards the desolate, unforgiving landscapes where Rome extracted its wealth. The destination might be the imperial mines of silver in Spain, lead in Britain, or gold in Dacia, or perhaps the vast quarries of marble and granite in Egypt or Italy, supplying the stone for Rome's monumental buildings. These places were effectively death sentences, designed for maximum output with minimal regard for human life. Your new home is a dark, suffocating hell. If it's a mine, you're deep underground, often in narrow, poorly ventilated tunnels, lit only by flickering oil lamps that barely pierce the gloom. The air is thick with dust, silica dust from the rock, and the pervasive, choking dust from the ore you're extracting. Imagine inhaling that dust with every breath, constantly coughing, your lungs slowly but surely filling with grit. This wasn't just uncomfortable, it led to chronic respiratory illnesses like silicosis, tuberculosis, and consumption, ensuring a slow, agonizing demise. You'd see men around you spitting blood, their chests racked with incessant coughs, their faces pale and drawn. Archaeological studies of Roman mine sites often reveal skeletons with evidence of severe respiratory damage and dramatically shortened lifespans. The work itself was unceasing, brutal, and incredibly dangerous. With primitive tools, picks, hammers, chisels, and crowbars, you're forced to chip away at solid rock for endless hours, day after day, year after year. Imagine the repetitive strain on your muscles, the constant vibration up your arms, the exhaustion that permeates your entire being. You're often chained to your task, or to other slaves, preventing escape and enforcing relentless labor. The clang of tools, the shouts of overseers, and the groans of exhausted men would be your constant soundtrack. The dangers were manifold and immediate. Rockfalls were common, burying men alive or crushing limbs. Explosions caused by the buildup of gases or the accidental ignition of flammable materials could rip through tunnels. Accidents with tools were frequent, leading to deep gashes, shattered bones, and permanent disfigurement. Imagine the screams echoing in the darkness as a section of the tunnel collapses, or a pickaxe slips, severing a foot. There were no safety protocols, no emergency services. If you were injured, you were often left to die, or summarily killed to prevent being a burden. If you were condemned to a quarry or public works like roads, aqueducts, or buildings, the work was equally brutal, just under the open sky. Imagine hauling massive blocks of stone, often weighing many tons, using only simple levers, ropes, and brute human force. You'd be pulling, pushing, and lifting in the scorching Roman sun, your muscles screaming, your skin raw from friction and abrasions. Death from heat stroke, exhaustion, or being crushed by falling stone was common. You'd see men collapsing, their bodies giving out from the sheer physical demands, a testament to the unforgiving nature of the labor. Historians often emphasize the immense scale of Roman infrastructure and the direct connection between these engineering feats and the vast, exploited forced labor system. Food and water were meager, usually coarse bread, gruel and contaminated water, just enough to keep you alive and working, but not enough to sustain health or energy. You'd be perpetually hungry, malnourished, your body a constant testament to deprivation. Malnutrition further weakened your immune system, making you highly susceptible to diseases like dysentery, which would sweep through the crowded, unsanitary work camps. The overseers often brutalized themselves, were driven by quotas and given free rein to use violence. Any perceived laziness or slowing of pace would be met with the lash, with clubs or with chains. Imagine the constant threat of a beating, the burning welts on your skin, the raw fear that would prevent you from resting, even for a moment, pushing your already exhausted body past its limits. You'd see fellow laborers flogged to death, or left to perish from their injuries, serving as grim warnings. Escape was virtually impossible. You were typically in remote, desolate areas, surrounded by guards, and often chained. Even if you made it out of the work site, you'd be without food, water, or knowledge of the surrounding land. The chances of freedom were almost nil. The psychological toll would be immense. The endless, repetitive labor, the pervasive threat of death or injury, the unceasing hunger and thirst, and the absolute lack of hope would slowly erode your mind. You would be reduced to a living automaton, driven only by the primal urge to survive another hour, another day. Your identity, your memories, your very humanity would begin to fade in the crushing reality of forced labor. So, as you see the distant grandeur of Roman architecture, remember that for countless individuals, their existence was defined by condemnation to forced labor. The mines, quarries, and public works projects were not just places of toil. They were hellish sites where human beings were treated as disposable tools, enduring a fate far worse than a quick death on the battlefield, leading to a slow, agonizing demise that ultimately broke mind and body. It certainly makes you appreciate labor laws, safety regulations, and the freedom to choose your profession, doesn't it? The cost of Roman grandeur was paid in the pulverized bodies and shattered lives of its most wretched. You've just endured the slow, agonizing death sentence of forced labor in Roman mines and quarries. But for some condemned individuals, especially those who were slaves or prisoners of war, their punishment was transformed into a terrifying spectacle, the gladiatorial arena. Death for entertainment. Forget the glory and the legends. The truth reveals a brutal reality of constant danger, intense physical and psychological torment, and a life often ending in a bloody, agonizing display for the amusement of the Roman masses. Imagine yourself, not as a cheering spectator in the stands, but as a newly condemned gladiator, perhaps a captured rebel, a criminal, or a slave whose master has deemed you expendable. You're taken to a ludus, a gladiatorial training school. The air here is thick with the smell of sweat, fear, and the lingering scent of blood from previous trainings. This isn't a place of heroic camaraderie. It's a grim, unforgiving boot camp where every day is a brutal test of survival. Your training is relentless and agonizing. You're taught to fight with various weapons, swords, tridents, nets, shields, but not necessarily to kill quickly. Instead, you're taught techniques to prolong the fight, to make it a spectacle, to ensure the crowd is entertained. Imagine the endless hours of drills, the constant beatings from your Lanesta owner, trainer, or his brutal overseers, who are often retired gladiators themselves. You push your body to its absolute limits, muscles screaming, bones aching, knowing that failure to perform means severe punishment or even summary execution. A common historical fact is that gladiators were often given a specific diet, almost vegetarian, to put a layer of fat on their bodies. This fat acted as a protective layer, making wounds less immediately fatal and prolonging the fight for entertainment. Rather than ending it quickly, your food, while often nutritious enough to build muscle, is monotonous barley, beans, and gruel. You're well fed, not out of kindness, but because you are a valuable commodity, a fighting machine that needs fuel. Your housing is a cramped cell, shared with other gladiators, offering no comfort or privacy. You sleep to the sounds of groans, coughs, and the clanking of chains. Hope is a dangerous luxury here, but the true terror begins when you are chosen for the arena. Imagine yourself marching out, not to battle against an army, but into the roaring, bloodthirsty chaos of the Colosseum or a local amphitheater. The sun glares down on the sand-covered floor, where the stench of blood from previous contests already lingers. Thousands upon thousands of spectators, their voices a deafening roar, fill the tiers above you, their eyes fixed on you, eager for death and spectacle. This is not a contest of honor, it's a performance designed for mass entertainment, and your life is the price. You are pitted against another gladiator, or perhaps a wild animal. The fight isn't about skill alone, it's about endurance, about making a good show, about satisfying the crowd. You hear the clash of steel, the grunts of exertion, the screams of pain. You feel the blows, the cuts, the raw agony. Your armor, while offering some protection, is heavy and restricts your movement. You fight desperately, not for glory, but for the slim chance of survival, knowing that every wound brings you closer to the inevitable end. And if you fall, wounded and defeated, the decision of life or death rests with the crowd, or the presiding magistrate, often signaled by a thumb gesture. Imagine lying on the sand, bleeding, gasping for breath, your eyes scanning the vast sea of faces, desperately seeking a thumb pointed upwards, pollis verso, for mercy. But more often, you might see the thumb pointing down, or perhaps a waving handkerchief, a signal for your execution. Then, the grim ritual the victor, or a specialized executioner, delivers the coup de grace, a fatal blow to your throat or heart. You hear the cheer of the crowd as your lifeblood soaks into the sand, becoming part of the spectacle. Historians still debate the true meaning and frequency of the thumbs up and thumbs down gestures, but the ultimate power of life or death resting with the crowd was undeniable. Beyond combat against other humans, some condemned individuals faced an even more horrific fate, fighting against wild beast venations. Imagine being thrown into the arena with a snarling lion, a charging bear, or a ferocious wild boar, often unarmed or poorly armed. A gruesome hunt designed to showcase exotic animals and ensure a bloody end for the human participants. You'd know you have virtually no chance of survival. Your death merely a brutal prelude to the main event. The psychological toll of this existence was immense. You were constantly aware that your life was not your own, that your body was merely a tool for entertainment, and that every fight could be your last. The friendships you might forge with fellow gladiators were tinged with the knowledge that one day, you might have to kill them, or watch them die. Hope was a dangerous luxury. Even if a gladiator survived many fights and gained fame, their freedom manumission was rare and hard-won. They were always branded by their past, living with the physical scars of their battles and the psychological trauma of having lived a life on the edge of death, constantly performing for the pleasure of others. So, as you hear the distant roar of an imaginary Roman crowd, remember that the gladiatorial games were not noble contests, but brutal spectacles of human suffering and death, engineered to entertain a vast empire. The life of a gladiator was one of unending physical abuse, constant fear, and the profound dehumanization of being a disposable instrument of entertainment. It certainly makes you grateful for modern spectator sports that don't involve actual death, doesn't it? The sands of the arena were stained with the awful truth of human cruelty, a terrifying form of ancient Roman punishment. You've just witnessed the brutal spectacle of gladiatorial combat, a terrifying punishment where life was entertainment. But what if your crime, or your status, led to a different kind of sentence? One that stripped you of everything you knew without shedding a drop of blood now. Prepare to face the profound and utterly dehumanizing reality of exile stripped of identity. Forget a mere relocation. Roman exile was a calculated punishment designed to erase your social standing, sever your connections, and leave you utterly vulnerable, a living ghost in a foreign land. Imagine yourself, a Roman citizen, perhaps even a well-born one, accused of a serious crime, treason, conspiracy, or even just offending the wrong powerful individual. You might avoid the arena or the mines, but the sentence delivered by the magistrate is exilium exile. Your heart sinks because you know this isn't a mere change of scenery, it's a social death. The immediate consequence of exile was the loss of your Roman citizenship. Imagine being stripped of the very identity that defined you, the rights and protections that set you apart in the ancient world. You could no longer vote, hold office, participate in Roman legal proceedings, or even claim the protection of Roman law. You were no longer civis Romanus, some "I am a Roman citizen." This wasn't just a legal formality, it was a profound psychological blow. The erasure of your core identity, your world, once ordered by Roman law and custom, suddenly became a chaotic, dangerous place. A common historical fact is that Roman citizenship was a highly prized status, offering immense legal and social protections, the loss of which was a devastating punishment. Then came the confiscation of your property. All your lands, your wealth, your household goods, your slaves. Everything you owned was seized by the state. Imagine being left with nothing but the clothes on your back, completely destitute. Your family, if they didn't follow you into exile, which was often forbidden or impossible, would be disinherited and face their own hardships. This wasn't just about financial ruin. It was about destroying your entire economic foundation, rendering you utterly dependent and powerless. You became a pauper overnight, your social standing annihilated. You would then be banished to a specific, often remote and undesirable location. This wasn't a choice of where to go. It was a forced relocation to a desolate island, a harsh borderland, or a culturally alien province. Imagine being forced to leave your beloved city, your home, your friends, and your family, knowing you might never see them again. The journey itself would be arduous, dangerous, and lonely, a stark contrast to the comfortable life you once knew. You'd arrive in a foreign place, perhaps speaking a different language, with no connections, no resources, and no legal protection. The psychological torment of this profound loss was immense. You would suffer from constant homesickness, a gnawing yearning for your familiar world. You'd be living among strangers, always aware of your outcast status, struggling to adapt to new customs and a harsh new reality. The isolation, the degradation of your status, and the despair of having lost everything would weigh heavily on your mind, often leading to profound depression or madness. You might be constantly worried about your family back in Rome, knowing they faced an uncertain future without your support. Historians still debate the extent of psychological impact suffered by Roman exiles, often referencing figures like Ovid, who wrote extensively about the misery of his banishment. Your life in exile would be one of perpetual vulnerability. As a non-citizen without property, you had no legal rights, no access to justice. You could be exploited, robbed, or abused with little recourse. Imagine being at the mercy of petty local officials or opportunistic criminals, knowing that no Roman law would protect you. You were a living ghost, stripped of your former identity and cast adrift in a hostile world. Even the threat of recall was a double-edged sword. Some exiles clung to the hope of a reversal of fortune, a new emperor, or a powerful patron who might bring them back. But this hope was often fleeting, and many died in exile, never seeing their homeland again. The constant oscillation between despair and faint hope would add another layer of psychological torment. Ultimately, exile was a form of living death, a punishment designed to strip away not just your freedom, but your very identity as a Roman. It was a terrifying reminder that even for a free citizen, the power of the state was absolute, capable of erasing your existence from the social fabric without resorting to execution. Your body might live, but your Roman self would be utterly annihilated. So, as you walk freely through your own city, remember that for you in ancient Rome, a sentence of exile meant a terrifying descent into nothingness. It was a profound and cruel punishment that left you a ghost in a foreign land, stripped of everything that made you who you were. It certainly makes you appreciate your citizenship, your home, and your personal freedom, doesn't it? For the Romans, erasing an identity was sometimes a more potent punishment than ending a life. You've just faced the profound and dehumanizing reality of Roman exile, a punishment designed to strip away your very identity. But for those deemed to have committed the most heinous crimes against the state, or for rebellious slaves, the final, most terrifying punishment was reserved crucifixion, the ultimate agony. Forget quick, merciful deaths. This was a slow, public, and excruciating ordeal, meticulously designed to inflict maximum suffering, break every fiber of your being, and serve as a chilling, unforgettable warning to all who witnessed it. Imagine yourself, now condemned to crucifixion, perhaps for treason, leading a slave revolt, or a particularly egregious act of piracy. You're dragged, often after being brutally flogged as we discussed earlier. Remember the tearing lash through the crowded streets of Rome or along a major road leading out of a city. You're likely naked or clad in a simple loincloth, humiliated, bleeding, and utterly exhausted. The crowd watches, a mixture of morbid curiosity, fear, and sometimes disdain. Your heart pounds, a desperate, animalistic terror. A common historical fact is that crucifixion was rarely used for Roman citizens unless the crime was exceptionally grave. But it was a standard punishment for slaves and non-citizens. You arrive at the site of execution, often a prominent location, a hill, or alongside a busy road, ensuring maximum visibility. The cross itself is a rough-hewn wooden structure, already prepared. You are either nailed to it or tied. If nailed, imagine the agonizing pain as heavy iron nails are driven through your wrists, not your palms, to better support the body's weight and your feet, tearing through flesh, nerves, and bone. The sensation would be searing, paralyzing, and utterly overwhelming. Your body would convulse with the shock, your screams tearing at your throat. If tied, rough ropes would bind you tightly, painfully cutting into your skin. Then, the cross is raised. Imagine the jarring, excruciating pain as your body is lifted and then drops into place with a sickening thud. The nails would tear further, your shoulders would dislocate, and your entire weight would pull down on your pierced limbs. You hang there, suspended, your feet barely supported by a small peg or not at all, making it impossible to rest. Your muscles would begin to cramp almost immediately, locking in agonizing spasms. The real torture of crucifixion was not just the initial pain, but the slow, agonizing suffocation. Your arms, stretched above your head, would make it incredibly difficult to breathe. Every breath would be a monumental effort, requiring you to push up with your legs, grinding against the nails in your feet, or straining against your dislocated shoulders. Imagine gasping for air, your lungs burning, your chest tightening, constantly fighting to draw a shallow breath. Your struggle to breathe would be visible to the crowd, making your agony part of the public spectacle. Death would typically come from asphyxiation, shock, or exhaustion. Historians still debate the precise physiological causes of death and crucifixion, but consensus points to a combination of hypovolemic shock, asphyxia, and cardiac arrest. You hang there, exposed to the elements, the scorching sun beating down, dehydrating you rapidly, or the biting cold winds chilling your exposed body. Flies would buzz around your open wounds, landing on your eyes and mouth. Imagine the thirst, the burning sensation in your throat, the flies crawling on your face, and your utter inability to brush them away. Hours pass, then perhaps days. Your body would be ravaged by cramping, dehydration, and the relentless, searing pain. The psychological torment would be equally immense. You are utterly powerless, publicly humiliated and stripped of all dignity. You watch the crowds pass by, some jeering, some indifferent, knowing that your suffering is merely entertainment or a stark warning. You hear the cries of other victims on nearby crosses, their agony mirroring your own. Your mind might eventually succumb to delirium, a merciful escape from the relentless pain, but not before enduring unimaginable terror and despair, sometimes to hasten death, especially if a Sabbath or religious holiday was approaching. The Roman soldiers would break the victim's legs crucifixion with a heavy club. Imagine the sickening crunch of bone, the new wave of excruciating pain, and the immediate inability to push yourself up to breathe, leading to rapid suffocation. This was a brutal act of mercy, ensuring a quick end to the suffering by making further respiration impossible. The bodies were often left on the crosses for days, sometimes weeks, to rot and be scavenged by animals. A final, horrifying deterrent. Imagine the stench of decaying flesh, the sight of ravens feasting, a grim tableau of Roman justice. So, as you hear the distant echoes of a hammer, remember that for you in ancient Rome, crucifixion was not just a punishment, it was a carefully orchestrated, agonizing, and public ritual of terror. It was designed to break your body and spirit, leaving you to die a slow, excruciating death as a chilling warning to all who dared to defy the might of Rome. It certainly makes you profoundly grateful for humane capital punishment where it exists, or, ideally, the abolition of the death penalty altogether, doesn't it? For the Romans, the cross was the ultimate symbol of their brutal power. You've just endured the unspeakable agony of crucifixion, the ultimate Roman punishment, a brutal warning to all who dared to defy. But the Romans had other equally terrifying methods of control, especially when dealing with large-scale military failures or rebellious units. Now, prepare to witness decimation group punishment's horror, where the terrifying random selection and execution of soldiers for collective failure turned comrades against each other and instilled a profound, indiscriminate fear. Imagine yourself as a Roman soldier, part of a legionary cohort, roughly 480 men. You've just returned from a disastrous campaign, or perhaps your unit has committed a grave act of cowardice in battle, a mutiny, or failed to hold a vital position. The commanding general, often a man like Crassus, known for his harsh discipline, is furious. He views your unit's failure not as individual acts, but as a collective disgrace, a stain on the honor of the legion, and a direct threat to Roman military discipline. Your punishment will reflect this. The sentence is decimation. Your cohort, perhaps a few hundred men, is assembled in a grim, silent formation. The general, or his tribunes, makes the terrifying announcement. 1 out of every 10 men will be executed, regardless of individual guilt. Imagine the sudden, icy grip of terror that seizes you. You're standing shoulder to shoulder with your comrades, your friends, your tent mates, knowing that 9 of you will live and 1 will die, chosen by the most arbitrary of methods. A common historical fact is that decimation was a rare punishment, reserved for extreme cases of military failure, but its existence instilled deep fear. The method of selection is simple, yet utterly dehumanizing. Your unit is divided into groups of 10. In each group, lots are drawn. Imagine a helmet being passed around, each man blindly reaching in, hoping not to draw the short straw. the marked pebble, or the fatal token. Your hand trembles as you reach inside, your heart pounding in your chest. You look at the faces of the 9 other men in your group, men you fought alongside, shared meager rations with, perhaps even saved their lives. Now, one of you is about to die, randomly selected by fate. When the lot is drawn and the unlucky man is identified, his fate is sealed. He is not executed by the general or a professional executioner. Instead, he is brutally beaten to death by his own 9 comrades. Imagine the horror of being told to take up a club, a rock, or a weapon, and turn it against your friend, the man with whom you just stood shoulder to shoulder. The condemned man is usually stripped and then set upon by his own comrades, often with sticks and stones, ensuring a slow, agonizing, and incredibly visceral death. The purpose is twofold: to maximize the terror and shame of the condemned, and to implicate the surviving 9 in the act, ensuring their complicity and loyalty through shared brutality. You hear the sickening thud of blows, the screams of the dying man, and the desperate grunts of the men forced to participate. The ground becomes slick with his blood. This act of forced fratricide is a profound psychological trauma. Imagine being compelled to murder your comrade, knowing that if you didn't, you might face the same fate. The guilt, the horror, the utter dehumanization of being forced into such an act would scar you for life. It completely shattered any bonds of trust or camaraderie, replacing them with a terrifying understanding of the state's absolute power. You learned that in the Roman army. Your life was disposable, and your loyalty was enforced through the most brutal means imaginable. Historians still debate the specific psychological effects of decimation on the surviving soldiers, but it's clear it was intended to instill extreme discipline through terror and complicity. The remaining 9 survivors, having just participated in the brutal killing of their comrade, were then often forced to live outside the camp, sometimes on meager barley rations instead of wheat, a constant reminder of their unit's disgrace. They would suffer public humiliation, knowing they were lucky, yet forever tainted by the horror they witnessed and participated in. Decimation wasn't just about punishment. It was about psychological terror on a mass scale. It was an act of extreme discipline, sending an unequivocal message throughout the entire army: individual failure reflected on the whole. And collective failure would be met with indiscriminate, merciless retribution. It broke down individual identity, forcing men to consider themselves as mere cogs in a larger, brutal machine, completely at the mercy of their commanders. So, as you hear the distant rumble of an imaginary Roman legion, remember that for a Roman soldier, a collective failure could mean drawing the ultimate, terrifyingly random short straw. Decimation was a horrifying punishment that turned comrades into reluctant executioners, leaving an indelible mark of fear, complicity, and profound psychological trauma on all who witnessed or participated in its brutal ritual. It certainly makes you appreciate modern military justice systems that focus on individual accountability, doesn't it? For the Romans, terror was a tool of ultimate discipline, wielded even within their own ranks. You've just witnessed the chilling, random horror of decimation, a brutal group punishment that turned Roman soldiers into reluctant executioners. But the Romans had another equally terrifying, though less physically violent, form of punishment reserved for those who truly angered the state: damnatio memoriae, erasure from history. Forget a simple prison sentence. This was a calculated psychological torment designed to annihilate your name, your image, and your entire legacy, ensuring you were utterly forgotten, a non-person erased from the collective memory of the empire. Imagine yourself, a powerful Roman figure, perhaps an emperor who fell from grace, a treacherous senator, or a general who betrayed Rome. You've lived a life of prominence, your image on coins, your statues in public squares, your name inscribed on monuments. Then you are condemned not just to death, but to damnatio memoriae. Your physical life might be ended quickly, but your existence as a memory, Your very identity is condemned to oblivion. The first and most visible act of damnatio memoriae was the destruction of your image. Imagine your grand statues, once symbols of your power, being pulled down, smashed into fragments, and defaced. Your face, once proudly displayed on coins, would be scratched out, hammered away, or even melted down. Busts of your likeness would be chiseled beyond recognition. This wasn't just vandalism, it was a deliberate public act of symbolic annihilation. Imagine walking through the Forum, seeing your own likeness being hammered into dust, your face utterly erased from the public consciousness. It was a visual declaration that you had never truly existed, or at least were no longer worthy of being remembered. A common historical fact is that numerous Roman statues and monuments bear the scars of damnatio memoriae, with faces or inscriptions visibly defaced or removed. Then came the erasure of your name. Your name, once spoken with respect or fear, would be meticulously chiseled out from public inscriptions on arches, temples, and official documents. Imagine your name, perhaps carved in stone for eternity on a triumphal arch, being painstakingly removed, leaving a blank, hollow space. Your name would be forbidden to be spoken in public, effectively turning you into he who shall not be named. The psychological impact of having your very name, your identity, removed from the public record, as if you had never contributed to history, would be immense. For a Roman, whose legacy and public honor dignitas were paramount, this was a truly terrifying punishment. Beyond public monuments, all private records pertaining to you could be confiscated and destroyed. Letters, legal documents, family histories, anything that kept your memory alive could be obliterated. Imagine every piece of evidence of your existence being systematically sought out and annihilated, leaving no trace for future generations. Your family, if they survived and were not implicated, would be forbidden from publicly mourning you or celebrating your life, effectively severing your connection to them even in death. Your laws and decrees would be nullified, your honors revoked, and any holidays or celebrations associated with your reign or achievements would be cancelled. Your entire contribution to Roman society, however significant, would be retroactively declared null and void. Imagine having spent a lifetime building a reputation, achieving great things, only for all your accomplishments to be legally erased as if they never happened. The true horror of damnatio memoriae was its profound psychological torment. It attacked the very core of Roman values: honor, legacy, and the importance of being remembered. For a society that placed immense value on a man's reputation lasting beyond his lifetime, being forgotten was a fate worse than death. You were condemned to a state of non-existence, a chilling void where your identity was utterly annihilated from the collective memory. It wasn't about physical pain, but the slow, agonizing obliteration of who you were, reducing you to nothing. Historians still debate the true effectiveness of damnatio memoriae in completely erasing a person from memory, noting that the very acts of erasure ironically preserved a record of who was targeted. However, its intent and psychological impact on the living were undeniable. This punishment served a dual purpose. It was a crushing retribution for the condemned, but also a powerful warning to others. It sent an unequivocal message: defy Rome, betray its ideals, or fall from grace too spectacularly. And you would not just die, but your very existence would be wiped from the annals of history. A terrifying fate for those who craved lasting fame and honor. So, as you walk through a museum filled with ancient artifacts, remember that for you in ancient Rome, a mistake could mean not just death, but the terrifying prospect of having your name, your face, and your entire legacy utterly annihilated. Damnatio memoriae was the ultimate punishment for those who defied the state, a chilling erasure designed to make you a non-person, forever forgotten. It certainly makes you appreciate your digital footprint and the right to be remembered. Doesn't it for the Romans? Forgetting was a weapon, and its wielders absolutely merciless. You've just grappled with the chilling psychological torture of damnatio memoriae, where the Roman state could erase your very existence from history. But for a vast segment of Roman society, the concept of punishment was even more raw and utterly devoid of mercy. Punishment of slaves, no rights, no mercy. Forget legal niceties or humane considerations. Roman law granted masters absolute terrifying power over their enslaved property, leading to a brutal reality of constant abuse, torture, and arbitrary death without any legal recourse. Imagine yourself as a Roman slave. Your life is defined by endless labor, poor living conditions, and the constant threat of violence. But beyond these daily hardships, there's a deeper, more fundamental horror in the eyes of Roman law. You are res, a thing, not a person. This absolute legal status as property meant you had no rights, no protections, and no personal autonomy whatsoever. Your master could do with you as he pleased, and the law would not intervene. The most pervasive form of punishment was the arbitrary physical abuse. Imagine making a small mistake, dropping a plate, being too slow in the fields, or simply displeasing your master or mistress on a whim. The immediate consequence could be a brutal beating. Your master could use a whip flagrum, a stick, or his bare hands. Imagine the searing pain of the lash, ripping into your flesh, leaving burning welts and open wounds. There was no limit to how many blows you could receive. No one to stop the violence, and you could be beaten for hours, left bleeding and broken. And no legal authority would question your master's actions. Your screams would be ignored. A common historical fact is that Roman legal texts explicitly stated that a master had the right to punish, mutilate, or even kill their slave without legal consequence, effectively treating them as disposable tools. For more severe offenses, or to extract information, torture was a legal and accepted practice for slaves. Unlike citizens, slaves had no legal protection against torture. Their testimony in court was only considered valid if obtained under extreme duress. Imagine being put on the rack, your limbs slowly dislocated from their sockets, or being branded with hot irons, leaving permanent, agonizing scars on your face or body, marking you as a runaway or repeat offender. You might be suspended by your hands for hours, or subjected to other horrific methods designed to inflict maximum pain and break your will. The goal was not justice, but absolute terror and submission. You'd witness other slaves being tortured, their screams echoing, a chilling reminder of your own vulnerability. Historians still debate the practical frequency of torture used against Roman slaves, but its legality and the detailed accounts of its methods attest to its terrifying presence in their lives. Slaves faced a constant threat of sexual exploitation. For female slaves, and often young male slaves, their bodies were considered property, perpetually vulnerable to the desires and whims of their owners' sons, or even their guests. There was no concept of rape as a crime against a slave. It was simply an exercise of ownership rights. Imagine the constant fear, the indignity, and the profound trauma of knowing your body could be violated at any moment, with no ability to refuse or resist, and no one to protect you. This was a hidden yet pervasive form of punishment and control. The ultimate punishment, often administered publicly, was execution. Slaves who attempted to escape, who murdered their masters, a particularly heinous crime, or who participated in revolts like the Spartacus rebellion we discussed, faced the most agonizing forms of death. Primarily crucifixion. Imagine being nailed or tied to a cross, left to die a slow public and excruciating death from suffocation, shock, and exposure. This wasn't just punishment. It was a terrifying spectacle designed to terrorize the entire slave population, ensuring obedience through the ultimate display of ruthless power. The sight of crucified bodies lining roads outside cities served as a constant, horrifying warning. Even if you weren't directly subjected to these extreme punishments, the pervasive knowledge of them, the sight of scarred bodies, and the daily witnessing of abuse created a profound psychological burden. You lived in perpetual fear, your life utterly at the mercy of your master's temper, with no hope of legal appeal or intervention. This fear was designed to crush any independent thought, any spark of rebellion, forcing you into a state of absolute compliance. So, as you hear the distant clang of an imaginary lash, remember that for you. As a Roman slave, punishment was a daily, terrifying reality, meted out without mercy or legal restraint. Your life was defined by the absolute power of your owner, and your suffering was a tool of control, ensuring the vast, brutal engine of Roman society continued to churn. It certainly makes you profoundly grateful for basic human rights, legal protections, and the freedom from arbitrary cruelty. Doesn't it for the Roman slave? Justice was a foreign concept, replaced by the relentless, brutal hand of ownership. You've just grappled with the absolute brutality of punishment for Roman slaves, a system utterly devoid of rights or mercy. Now, as our journey through Roman punishments concludes, let's reflect on a key aspect that permeated every form of retribution, the spectacle of justice. Forget discrete legal proceedings. Roman punishments, whether minor or fatal, were meticulously designed not just for retribution, but for public terror, communal shaming, and an unequivocal display of state control, turning agony into a chilling performance. Imagine yourself in ancient Rome, not as the condemned, but as an ordinary citizen, walking through the forum or attending the games. Punishment wasn't hidden away. It was brought out into the public eye, often deliberately placed in prominent locations for maximum impact. You would witness it regularly, and its images would be etched into your memory, influencing your behavior and reinforcing the pervasive power of the state. Think back to the public humiliation of flogging. This wasn't just about the searing pain for the individual, it was about the public ripping away of dignity. Imagine the screams, the blood, the nakedness, all displayed openly. You, as a witness, would internalize the lesson defy authority, and your body, your honor, will be publicly shamed. This visual spectacle was designed to create an immediate, visceral understanding of consequences, far more effective than a written law. A common historical fact is that public punishment served as crucial forms of social control in pre-modern societies, acting as powerful deterrents. Then consider the crucifixions, often lining major roads leading into cities. Imagine the horrifying sight of hundreds, sometimes thousands of dying individuals left to rot on crosses, their agony stretched over days. This wasn't just execution, it was a vast, static display of terror. Every traveler entering or leaving the city would be confronted with this grim tableau. It was an unmistakable message to slaves and rebels. This is your fate if you dare to challenge Roman authority. The sheer scale and visibility of the suffering were calculated to break the will of entire populations, making rebellion unthinkable. Even the conditions of imprisonment, though not direct punishment, were designed for public awareness. While the deepest cells were hidden, the knowledge of the dark, unsanitary, and brutal holding pens would circulate. The reputation of places like the Mamertine prison, a name whispered in fear, served as a psychological deterrent, painting a vivid picture of the grim fate that awaited those who defied the law. Even before a verdict was reached, the gladiatorial games, particularly when they involved the execution of criminals damnatio ad bestias, condemnation to the beast, or ad gladium, condemnation to the sword, were perhaps the ultimate spectacle of justice. Imagine witnessing individuals thrown to hungry lions, or forced to fight skilled gladiators to the death, not as entertainment for the masses. This wasn't justice for the accused. It was a horrifying performance designed to satisfy the crowd's bloodlust and to demonstrate the absolute power of the state to condemn and destroy. The roar of the crowd, the cries of the dying, the sheer theatricality of it all. It transformed punishment into public entertainment, blurring the lines between justice and brutal spectacle. Historians still debate the extent to which these public executions genuinely deterred crime versus merely entertaining the populace. However, their role as a display of state power is undeniable. The act of damnatio memoriae itself, The erasure from history was a public spectacle of symbolic annihilation. Imagine seeing statues being pulled down, faces chiseled away, names removed from monuments. This was a visual ritual, performed publicly, declaring that the condemned was not just dead, but had never truly existed in the memory of Rome. It instilled a unique kind of fear, the fear of being forgotten, of having your very existence denied by the state. The very concept of Roman imperium, their supreme authority, was enforced not just by laws, but by these visceral, public displays of control. Every punishment, from the minor flogging to the mass crucifixion, served as a grim lesson, a theatrical performance of power designed to keep order in a vast and diverse empire. This created a culture where brutality was normalized, where suffering was a public spectacle, and where the lines between justice, entertainment, and terror were often deeply blurred. So, as you reflect on the Roman justice system, remember that it was a deeply performative one. Its punishments were not just actions, but chilling spectacles designed to inspire fear, reinforce control, and publicly assert the absolute authority of Rome over its citizens and its vast, often restless population. It certainly makes you appreciate modern privacy laws and due process, doesn't it? For the Romans, justice was often an unforgettable, horrifying show. You have completed a journey through the terrifying realities of punishment in ancient Rome. We have explored the public humiliation of flogging, the nightmares of pre-trial imprisonment, the slow death of forced labor, the pleasure of death in the gladiatorial arena, the loss of identity in exile, the agony of crucifixion, the horror of collective punishment by dismemberment, the psychological pain of being erased from history, the sheer brutality and lack of mercy towards slaves, and finally the ostentatious nature of Roman justice, which turned pain into a public spectacle. As you drift off to sleep, let the images of whips, chains, and terrifying public spectacles fade away. It is a chilling reminder of the absolute power of the state and the terrible cost of resistance in one of history's most powerful empires.